Bear's Claw. It used to be a very underwhelming weapon, and ever since Shadow of the Erdtree got announced, we immediately got like intrigued about this weapon moveset because it attacks like a beast. That being said, the Red Bear's Claw, they are just the design and the concept of everything. It's just amazing. And the claws on itself, but the weapon is very underwhelming because it doesn't keep up that well with what it promises for you to be a versatile kind of warrior that deals tremendous amounts of damage and such. So they buffed it, at least, at the very least, the Ash of War. I mean, I still think that the weapon itself, it's kind of underwhelming, and it used to be like a crappy weapon, dude, and now we're trying to build it to make it at the very least viable. I would say that right now, even more than just being a viable weapon, it's a very, very strong choice. If you complete the animation on the Ash of War, if you're fighting against bosses, especially if you're using a Mimic Tier, for example, or if you're using Spirit Ashes, you can potentialize the damage that much more because it can deal tremendous amounts of DPS in a short amount of time. What is it that they did? Well, they basically increased the damage, which is what it needed because it's just an underwhelming weapon. The only downside about it is that they didn't do anything about the weapon on itself per se. They didn't increase like virtually anything on the weapon itself. So I wouldn't recommend for you to use this weapon with the basic attacks. I would, as a matter of fact, just recommend for you to use it entirely, just on its entirety with the Ash of War, which is what we're building it for right here. If you complete the animation of the Ash of War, you're going to deal up to 6 to 8k damage depending on the resistances of the enemies. Now the weapon is a strength scaling weapon, but it also has bleed buildup. However, the bleed buildup, it's just 45. It's a consequential little something that is going to happen sometimes here and there if you manage to attack the enemy a couple of times, but it's not something like a weapon in your armament or arsenal. It's not something that you can rely onto for DPS. It's just something that sometimes might happen around here and there if you're lucky enough not to kill the enemy before you actually destroy the enemy. Now, the stance damage on the weapon, it's just not that amazing either. If you complete the animation, it's going to have up to 32.6 in total. Now the animation, it's very long. Like the base damage on each input of the animation, which can be interchangeable if you want to not compel or commit to the animation, you can by all means, and it's something that you should be doing. But each hit is going to deal 10.4, and then the second one is 10.4 as well, and the final one is 11.6. So more often than not, you are not going to be staggering bosses or enemies with this build. However, like I said, we can rely on a very, very reliable and more often than not powerful 6 to 8k damage if you manage to take advantage of the windows of opportunity that you have in certain specific types of bosses, if you know them, or if you're using a Spirit Ash, the amount of DPS that you can combo when it comes to the inputs of the attacks, it's actually kind of nice. So how about the stats that I have for this build? It doesn't cost that much of FP, and I'd say that one of my main focus in here is going to be the FP cost consumption. Like I said, it doesn't cost that much of FP, but more often than not, we want to be focusing ourselves on dealing as much damage as possible with the Ash of War of the weapon, because the base damage of the weapon, it's nothing that amazing. And yes, it can proc build up a little bit better, but the animations in between the attacks, they lock you into the animation before you can actually cancel the attack. On the second input of the light attack, you have to wait until your character does that 3-hit combo, which more often than not is going to leave you open in translation of not receiving. You're going to receive more damage than the one that you're going to be dealing, so it's not ideal. Then again, focus yourself on the usage of Ash of War. That's why we want to have 30 Might in here. Vigor 60, Endurance 25. It's not a heavy weapon. But if you want to be using the armor and weapon that we want to be using and still have the amount of poise that we have, that's something that you're going to need. 70 points into strength. This weapon scales with a B on strength. And two-handing a weapon, it's not a thing. You're going to dual wield in here, meaning that you cannot take advantage of the 50% more strength when you're two-handing a weapon. If you can reach the hard cap, that's something that we're going to be trying to do so. But at the end of the day, the Ash of War is also going to be scaling of that, so we want to reach that as much as we can possibly do. 15 Faith. The 6 to 8k damage that I was telling you about is not necessarily 6 to 8k damage. Basically on our character, it's because we are buffing our character and we're trying to increase the percentages in damage that we are dealing. So ideally it's going to, without a buff, it's going to be like 5k damage or a little bit less than that. So yeah, there's that. We'll talk about the buffs in a little while. Our equipment is of course the Red Bear's Claw. This cannot be infused, you cannot change the imbuement on this weapon, so it's always going to have that strength B scaling. And then we have the Finger Seal. Like always, I use this thing to buff my character, and since we're using buff percentage base spells, that means that we don't really need to upgrade this thing nor use a beta one for it. As for the armor, just anything that would allow you to look like kind of good, kind of cool with this build. I'm using the Iron Rivet armor and then the Pelt of Ralva alongside with the Gauntlets of Solitude and the Grips of Solitude right here, just purely to be able to have a little bit more poise. They increase the poise while you're using the animation of the Ash of War, so getting that 51 poise threshold plus the one that you get from the animation, that's actually kind of nice. The Talismans, there's not too many things that you can have right here to increase your damage output that you're going to have. Mainly, what you're going to be using, Shadow of Alexander, to increase the damage of your Ash of War by 15% right there. And since, like I mentioned, our main focus in here is to fighting as much as humanly possible with our Ash of War. So, even like I mentioned, on redundance, we're not using that much FP consumption when with our Ashes of War, but that's our main means of damage. So the Carrion Filigree Crest, I consider it for it to be a must. The next two Talismans that you can use are going to be basically entirely up to you. I wouldn't recommend, for example, the Millicent Prosthesis or Wing Sword Insignia, even while you deal quite a lot of hits when it comes to the light attacks. In 2 inputs, it's going to be 5 attacks. However, like I mentioned, they don't deal that much damage. But if, for example, you want to use it as a preparation where you use the light attacks to increase your attack power because of the Talisman and then follow up with the Ash of War, that's also FP economy. So that's something that can be done. However, I leave that as an optional kind of thing with the rest of the support characters, with the rest of the support kind of Talismans that they can have in this build. We want to have 15 points into Faith because we want to have the Flame grant me strength. This increases our physical damage by 20%, and remember that, yes, of course, we're not taking advantage of the 20% extra fire damage and the weapon cannot be infused, but it's still 20% extra physical damage that it's very, very good because our damage output when it comes to DPS, it's actually kind of high. Like, it's nothing tremendously high like the very overpowered weapons that we have in the game, but it's still something very, very high that it's going to convey that extra 20% more damage into that much more damage. And then we have the Golden Bow to increase that damage furthermore by 15% and to increase our damage negation, the damage that we take from the enemy by 10% right there. With a mix of Wondrous Physique, you're gonna have a little bit of a versatility kind of thing in here. I would consider a must, at least for this build, to have the Strength Nut Crystal Tia and then the Fate Nut Crystal Tia. The Strength Nut Crystal Tia is going to allow us to reach the hard cap for our build to 80, so that virtually we have 80 throughout the course of the entire fight of the boss, because these guys last about 3 minutes. And then we have the Fate Nut Crystal Tia that will allow you to use the Golden Bow after using that 15 Faith that we actually have, so you're virtually always able to use Golden Bow. But by all means, the one that you can change if you want to. For example, if you want to combine that strategy that I told you about, the Millicent Prosthesis, where you use the preparation of the attacks with the basic light attacks and then follow up with the Ash of War, you can by all means use the Thorny Crack tier to increase the damage while using the consecutive attacks. It's just overall concessions that you would want to make and to tailor this build a little bit to your tastes and playstyles. I made this build because I was curious about a class kind of build that would be viable, that would be strong. I know that I'm making it sound like it's not that amazing, it's just that you have so many very powerful options in the game that this seems a little bit underwhelming, and I'd say that there's many things that could break this thing potentially. For example, if it had some kind of arcane scaling, even if it wouldn't be that high, just something that allows us to upscale that bleeding. This could be a very, very powerful weapon. However, being that bleeding something a little consequence that it's going to happen sometimes here and there, and that's nothing guaranteed that's going to be there all the time and that you cannot rely on it and use it as a weapon. It's just that a little disappointing that we have many weapons like that in this DLC, but many of the other weapons like that DLC, for example the Dragon Hunter Grey Katana, suffers the same kind of scenario, but that weapon is actually very, very powerful, very, very powerful in its own rights. And this one, yes, it's very powerful, but thanks only because of the buff for the Ash of War. The basic usage of the weapon, it's still something that I wouldn't recommend. So yeah, there's that. Anyways, if you like the content, like and ever super appreciate it. And also you today you're a gorgeous and beautiful person, you're indeed a gorgeous and beautiful person, subscribe to the channel, join the Discord, like the video. Have a great day and goodbye.